Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Claudio Rizzi. I'm the Head of Mechanical and Electrical for Waltham Forest Housing, and I'm responsible for the repairs, maintenance and planned works in relation to the mechanical and electrical stuff installed in our blocks. So that's the gas, the communal heating systems, water hygiene, lifts, fire alarms, and so on. Tony?
Yeah, I'm Tony Antonioni. I'm the Electrical and Retrofit Contract Manager for Housing in Waltham Forest.
Perfect.
Cool.
Thank you very much for that. I'll just do a tiny bit of housekeeping just to say that microphones and cameras going to be kept off, but please feel free to use the chat function for any questions. It'll be a fairly short presentation and then we can have some time for some questions at the end. I'll be in the chat if there's anything going on or if you're having any technical issues. And then the slides at the end will be shared with you as well, just in case that's an issue, and this session is being recorded. But yeah, feel free to make a start, Tony, Claudio.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, I'll move on to the first slide. That's just an overview for the presentation, just a brief agenda. So I'll just move on to the next slide. This one gives you a little bit of overview of our stock and where we are. We have just over 10,000 tenanted properties in Waltham Forest Council. In total, including leaseholders, we have about 12,500 properties. Our retrofit target, as you can see there, is 80% of homes to EPC B by 2030. And we still have over 6,500 homes to reach that target. Our estimated cost is, well, it's showing £85 million there, but in reality, the costs are only going up as we're getting real costs coming back for the retrofit works we're doing. We're feeding into it, and that cost has slowly been increasing. And in reality, with the requirements under the PAS 2030 and 2035 in relation to extended roof lines, insulated steps, canopies, and all the other bits that need to be done, it's only increasing those costs. So whilst we're showing £85 million, we're only going one way, I'm afraid. This slide gives us a little bit of an overview of where we are currently with our stock. The majority of our properties are EPC-C, as you can see, which does give us a little bit of a challenge in relation to funding, because we can only get external funding for D and below. So for us to hit our target of EPC-B, where we're having to self-fund or look at how we can self-fund the works to the properties, and we're looking at different options and ways we can do it. And one of them is trying to maximise our capital programme and bring energy measures in whilst we're doing capital work. So where we're doing roofs and windows and doing refurbishment works, we're trying to bring capital energy works in. So we're getting the savings. So for instance, if we're putting scaffold up to do works, we can do EWI, we can do PVs, and we're getting the savings around that. One of the issues we're finding as well is that we've hit a lot of the low-hanging fruit. So the properties which are left, the Ds and below, they're the harder to treat properties, and we're finding that the average cost per property is going up by quite a fair amount. Whereas at our last bid for SHDF, we were looking at an average cost of around £20,000 a property, 25 with PV. The average costs that are coming in now is between £35,000 and £45,000. So those are the challenges that we're finding at the moment. One of the other things as well is our target is B. So we still, whilst the Ds and below are important, we still need to look at the Cs. But for the amount of money we're spending on getting a D or Ds and below to Bs, we could get an awful lot more properties from a C to a B. So there's that that assessment and juggling that, because we have to meet our targets. We have to hit the worst performing properties, but we also still have to hit our better performing properties, which are C's, to hit them, to bring them up to a B. So it's a bit of a juggling act, if you like, in relation to trying to fit the budgets to our requirements. The other thing we're finding as well is just the quality of the data and the quality of the EPCs, as and when we've actually got a program at the moment with one of our partners who are out doing EPCs. We're finding that you do a snapshot of where you are with EPCs today, and in 2-3 months' time you do it again and it's all changed, mainly because we're getting better and better data all the time. And one of the things we are finding, though, is consistency with some of the EPCs. We're finding that very similar properties seem to have different EPCs, and we're finding that different surveyors may take a slightly different view, or will miss something or see something. So the other thing we're finding is that we're having to revisit some of those EPCs, but generally speaking, that's a bit of an overview of where we are as a borough. I'd like to hand over to Tony now, who will start give you some information around Southfield Court.
Okay. Afternoon, everyone. Following on from Claudio, as you saw from that data, one of our challenges is one of the things we've done actually well is that we've got a lot of experience of retrofitting individual houses. Where we are lacking experience, has been looking at blocks of flats, mainly because it's a lot easier to deal with an individual property than it is dealing with the complications and the finances and the scale of work required in blocks of flats. And again, as Claudio mentioned, one of the challenges for dealing with blocks of flats is trying to see how best we can integrate the retrofit into our existing refurbishment or larger capital works. The site in question, Southfield Court, as you can see, is a block of 40 flats, 70s, and you can see the sort of different roof levels and the different external fabric materials used. As you can see, the average EPC there was D. We did have some C's in there and some F's, and the current heating was delivered by very old night storage heaters, so not very efficient for the residents. And the hot water was delivered by a CHP unit, which again was on its getting on a bit and looking to be replaced. The site was also identified as needing, on our normal capital programs, needing roof, windows, and also had some structural issues that needed to be looked at. So we basically decided it was an ideal site where we've got some existing refurbishment work that was needed. We've got some electrical and mechanical items that would need investment, and because of the inefficiency of the building, it would also benefit from a sort of deep retrofit. So that's why we chose this site. The only other factor was it didn't have any leaseholders, because we wanted to keep it as a nice, clean, simple, straightforward. What are the technical requirements for retrofitting here, and not being diverted too much about some of the issues that may come along with having leaseholders on site. Once we'd identified the property, we looked around at how best do we get the information to assess what are the options, and that's when we had got a lot of really useful help from the Carbon Trust, and we also worked with Stroma. They undertook various assessments, obviously doing all their calculations on heat losses. They actually went into a couple of flats to do those proper calculations, and they came up with a list of, I believe it was 6 options for us to consider, with quite varying values linked to those. As you'll see from the measures that were identified, they were pretty much what we expected, which was windows and doors, roof insulation, external wall insulation. The figures did support the provision of an air source heat pump, communal air source heat pump, and a solar PV, because we had quite reasonably extensive flat roof space on the site. These are just some of the photos actually in progress, as you can see, the roof covering, windows, and the EWI. We did employ, and that's one of the important factors, was we brought a team together right from the start that covered all the areas, the specialist areas. So we had someone from our building team. We've got the Carbon Trust and Stroma organisations, but also our existing supply chain. We're particularly lucky to have, having done already a lot of retrofit works, we've got that established supply chain. So we had our long-term partnering company, which is Aston Group, and then we appointed some of their architects, which is Walsh Associates, and also a mechanical electrical consultants, Status Design, and having that group right from those very early stages, right from the appraisal, they're actually involved in the appraisal as well, providing some data, but having that whole group together at the beginning was pretty critical to developing a more comprehensive solution for this site. Right. One of the things we learned pretty quickly was that we ran into some unexpected surprises. We had planned, for example, we had assessed the roof structure, but once we started looking at that in more in depth, rather than, it's got a timber joist roof. And the original plan was to sort of double up on those joists to provide the sufficient structure to support the PV and the air source heat pumps. But on further investigations, it was identified that having to strip off the roof, working directly above residents with not much between the workmen and the residents, a little bit of plasterboard. But we also identified that there were a lot of electrical services running through the joists, which would all have to be disconnected, and a lot of access into the flats. At that point, we decided we needed a different solution. And again, that's where having a really competent supply chain and contractor came into its own. And what we ended up doing, as you can see from the photo there, we ended up agreeing on a new additional steel framework. We had to raise that parapet wall a little bit and add some pad stones. But fundamentally, it was a new steel structure. That meant that the roof recovering and the added insulation could be done much more quickly, much more easily. And it also meant the steel structure helped with some of the structural issues that were identified. The further bonus to it was, because it was reasonably raised off the now new roof level, it also meant that future access to roof repairs was much easier. And can't say we actually planned for that, but that was the net result. Because one of the problems we do have with lots of PV on the roof is the moment there's a leak, you have to have most of it off to trace the leak and then do whatever repairs that are done. As it turns out, the actual cost of doing the work this way, using the steels, actually worked out cheaper for us, as it happens, and because it avoided all that electrical work and needing to access flats. So that's basically an example of a major sort of adaptation we've had to make to allow for the retrofit services and deal with the on-site issues. Right, challenges. We've got several slides on challenges, because to be honest, I think we were struggling to contain ourselves. There are always challenges on this type of project. The biggest, to be fair, is it's not so much the technical. It's been around juggling different organisations' needs. I mean, in this case, we had in effect 3 funding streams. We had SHDF, we had COF, and we had our own capital budgets. And you know, we had some control over our capital budgets, but in terms of SHDF and COF, you know, we had certain deadlines to meet for the works to start and works to be completed and the funding to be drawn down. And then on a project of this sort of scale and intensity, that was a problem, particularly when you're thrown some issues with part supplies or as it turned out, we had maybe it was our fault, but it turned out SHDF requirements wanted pre and post air tightness test. We presumed it will be on sample flats, and we'd priced on sample flats. But when we were then challenged on that, and they said that it needed it for every single flat, so suddenly you're going from, you know, a couple of flats on each floor. It was 40 times 2 air tightness tests. So that gave us a few issues. We also later on had some issues where when we got to the stage of signing off the external wall insulation in order to meet the deadline for SHDF, the problem is we hadn't finished the work on the PV and the air source on the roof. Therefore, we couldn't strike the scaffold. Until you struck the scaffold and made good the connection points of scaffold to the building, the EWI certification wouldn't be issued. So it ended up we needed at various points we needed to apply for some extensions of time and make our arguments, which we achieved, but it did require an awful lot of work on the side of our contractors to reshuffle and resequence their programs sort of to meet the funding requirements as opposed to the on-site technical requirements. So that was something, again, it was fine at the beginning because we'd planned for most of them, but we did right at the beginning run into problems with planning delays and a few others, which then squeezed the whole program down, and the little bit of leeway we had sort of disappeared. So that was the biggest challenge, is managing everybody's outcomes and needs they're looking for, the money, and also the program in terms of delivering the work in the most efficient and shortest time possible. We've probably covered that.
Yeah, it might be worth mentioning as well in relation to the bidding of the SHDF as well, because as soon as the funding is released, you do have a very tight timescale to pull together all the information that's required. And I think we were quite lucky in this respect, in that we already had an existing supply chain, and we could work very closely with them and be able to pull together the prices, the costs, the scheme for us to be able to actually submit the bid and for us to actually meet the deadlines, because the timescales are quite close. And unless you have a scheme fairly well developed, they are very tight timescales to go and collect the information, put the programs together and demonstrate how you're going to supply the works and to have that supply chain. So in that respect, we were quite lucky to already have an existing supply chain where we've done previous works with them, and we had agreed costs and prices for us to be able to submit the bid. So that was a challenge, but we were certainly helped by having Aston Group and the existing supply chain.
No, that's correct. And to be fair, I think that's one of the issues with anyone that provides external funding. They've got their own timelines, they work into their own priorities, and anyone that was involved in that bidding round, because now we're talking about going back to 2021 when we started developing the project, is a chicken and egg situation where it's good to have projects developed, ready to go, sitting on the shelf, but until the various external funders tell you what their criteria is, what their timelines are, in terms of what qualifies, what doesn't, you can't second guess. So it's good to have projects ready to go, but I don't think it's quite recognised how much time is required in the design stage and developing the project, and that's when, you know, even when we got awarded the funding, the problem then was they had a very tight start deadline and a completion deadline. So again, everyone's got their needs, and our role is to try and find the best way to deliver that, and as well as delivering, again, the most efficient way of delivering the services. I mean, again, I'm sort of preaching to people that already know all this, but the other critical area was always with the scale of work, was to the amount of access we would need to get into individual flats and homes, and also the length of the program. You know, it's basically a year-long program, so, and it's very disruptive, very noisy, very intrusive on the residents. So resident engagement, I know we all talk about it, but that can never be underestimated. And unfortunately, you know, we had our supply chain with Aston's RLOs, but also a lot of support from the in-house not site manager, but the wardens, the hostel, because it is a site managers, develop that trust with the residents, that you know, appointments be made and kept, but they'd also adapt to those individual residents' particularly needs, whether it's their working patterns, whether it's dropping off kids to school, picking them up, because they adapted so well to those residents' needs. I'm still surprised at how well it went, and essentially I don't even recall a single complaint of any description, and we're still gathering some customer feedback on that, but the comments we've had have been exceptional and really positive. We've even had people that used to be in the property walk past and asked to come in and have a look. That they're taking photos of the property to show, well, probably their family and other friends of how much it had changed, because the site was somewhat dismal, in all fairness, and the change has been very dramatic. But that resident engagement, again, can never be underestimated. It can cause delays, or it can work in your favour in terms of minimising those delays. Again, some of the challenges, like we said, where we had to adapt the programme, you know, as much as you can plan everything you like in terms of the programme, when you're waiting on major items such as the air source heat pump, that was one of the causes why we couldn't finish EWI, and because we couldn't strike the scaffolding, because we still had to finish off the air source heat pump. So again, it's normally you're trying to incorporate a bit of catch-up time within the overall program, but when sometimes you just can't control things, and you have to have that adaptability to make the most of the time you're waiting, carry on with other areas, speed up certain parts of the program, and then make it up later on. And again, that's where having a really good supply chain, in our case, the principal contractor, which was Aston Group, that's where they really came into their own. One of the other challenges, again, especially on a program that's got quite a long lead-in time and being developed, and you try and include all the sensible things that you can think of at the time, because it's over a longer period to develop, you go through all the funding applications, and then you go through the actual start of the works, the lead-in times for that, and actually starting on site. Tend to find that things move on and things change a little bit. In our case, there was more findings from various building safety reports, places like Grenfell reports and so on, and basically, you know, you're starting to have to look at the current regulations and amend or incorporate some of those works into your program. And we had that. Some of it was to do with building safety, I mean, we're updating the fire alarm system anyway, but there's other issues around fire stopping. But there's also a little bit of scope creep in the sense of, well, we're doing all this work, we're pulling down lots of ceilings, we're putting all services on the ceilings in the corridors, we're putting up nice, fresh new ceilings, demountable ceilings, but we're not painting the walls. You know, we changed the doors, you know, and so on. So, you know, in a little bit of hindsight, we probably should approach these a little bit more than just the original capital works that needed doing and the retrofit. We need to sort of, well, we've learned that we've got to plan for it to be more of a complete refurbishment rather than a piecemeal approach, because it's just cheaper. You've got all the resources, you've got everybody on site, you've got residents already disturbed, for the sake of changing some floor covering and redecorating the internals. You know, it was made sense to do it. We also had some additional requests for things like there was an office in the property, and there was also a couple of mobility scooter storage cupboards, and a small laundry. And again, once we were on site, then the hostel site team was sort of requesting that we incorporate some of those. So, you know, we did, but we have to play around with our funding a little bit and, you know, find a few savings and balance things out a little bit. So again, one of the things we've learned there is to sort of try and consider, within reason, those ancillary sort of works that make sense or is cheaper to do it whilst we're there. Here's some just pictures before. The before doesn't look too bad, in all fairness, but what you probably won't notice there is the mix of materials. There's aluminium composite, there was some asbestos containing materials, brick, but the way it was constructed was also slightly odd once you start digging into the fabric, and that's one of the things, you know, I won't say we've learned, because we know it already, but deep retrofitting in old buildings will always surprise you sometimes. As an example, what we found is that there's an internal ring beam, concrete ring beam, that ran above the doors of all the flats. So it's not the outer fabric, it's an internal wall. And the original plan was to bring heating pipes at a high level into the flats. But we very quickly learned that that the ring beam was there, and we had to redesign the routes for the pipe work. And again, that took quite a bit of reshuffling, and the danger with reshuffling, redesigning layouts, is you then create further problems down the line. Now, we had a few of those as well, but they were relatively minor. Yeah, that's a picture of the actual air source heat pumps on the right there, on the steel frame, and on the left is obviously the PV systems. Now, outcomes, it's tricky, because this was very much the original basis was looking at carbon reduction, which is obviously retrofit orientated, but there was also the financial benefits of doing what we're doing that we've assessed, and we're looking at about at least £17,000 a year, but we think it's going to be more than that. The project, for those that aren't aware, is only literally just completed, so we're going to need really ideally a full year of data to assess the stats on the carbon savings and the cost savings. But what we have already established is the comfort levels that have been improved. Even in the common areas, it's night and day, and residents have continually mentioned it. Contractors themselves mention it when they're in there. It's quite stable. We've just gone through, well, not now, but a few months ago, you know, we went through a very hot spell, and once you're in there, it's actually, you didn't notice that it was that hot or that cold. It was just comfortable. And that's the same with residents, because we also had because of the delay in the air source heat pump, we had some, the program was delayed, and therefore we're beginning to stray into a winter period for our residents. So we're going into winter period with no heating service. And we had, one of the things we had to do was just offer heaters to oil heaters to all the residents, and most of them either took one or started giving them back to us, and others didn't even want one because they were already comfortable, and that's without any actual proper heating. And those were the comments that the properties are that much warmer. I didn't mention the details, but there are, we went for triple glazed windows. We didn't go to building control standards. We went to the recommended standards that we picked up from the options appraisal that Carbon Trust and Stroma and our contractors developed. So we did not go for the cheapest option. We did go for a sensible option that would produce the outcomes that we were looking for. Again, I've covered some of the lessons learned, but anyone dealing with any sizable project will tell you you just can't ever have enough time for the design stage. But I think when it comes to retrofit, I really do think it can't be rushed, because you've got to be sure of the measures, be sure of as much as you can. Well, where are the pinch points within the building? Investigate the building, make sure that those areas that you're relying a lot on are what you think they are, because as Claudia mentioned earlier on, a lot of property data and asset data is never quite as good or reliable as you like to think. So if you have the opportunity of time, then doing actual investigations of the property to confirm what you're basing your decisions on is, in our view, very wise. Again, as much as you can, look, not so much scope creep, but look for the consider, whilst you're doing certain works, whether secondary works should be built in. Like I said, whether it's paint, decorating, flooring. We also ended up doing some sort of tidy up of the landscape because the property was looking so good and improved externally and internally. We started getting pressure to tidy up the outside. So unfortunately, we did run out of spare money. So it was a bit limited, but we totally tidied up the paving, some grass areas, and removed a lot of overgrowth of plants. Yeah, in terms of outcomes, as much as we set out for looking at the carbon savings, I think we could have been a lot clearer in terms of other performance outcomes. And again, that's something that sort of develops over time in terms of different requirements come in, different targets come out of the woodwork. So there's a limit to what you can do, but it's just being very clear of what the outcomes you're looking for, so that, and how you plan to measure them. We've got, like I said, we got at least a year to fully review the performance of the building. Like I said, we've already could see savings on the fuel costs, the comfort levels, and the generation of the PV system, the operation of the air source heat pumps, the benefits of the windows, and so on. But it's getting that hard data, and that's going to take us a while before we've got that. Again, I think I touched on it before, but trying to have that multidisciplinary team together at the beginning, because a lot of these projects are either building led or M&E led, and that's something to be aware of. Whereas if you combine people together, then they've got the opportunity for their comments, to have their input, and it can help avoid any design implications down the road. Hey, I think that's it. Sorry, I had to rush there a little bit.
Thank you very much.